We greet you all. My name is Bafana Tini. I am a rapper, like I said. I'm a poet, whatever you want to call me. Others call me an MC, others call me a poet, others call me a rapper. So it's all sorts of names. And today we are here at the Earread Project, our podcast, where we have a very special guest, whom I've basically been wanting to have on this platform for a very long time, and it is finally happening. And obviously we are on camera, but we also have an audience. So the audience is out there, and Yanong, we're about to start this beautiful conversation, which is important, on a paper or thesis, or basically a chapter from a thesis by Molemo Moiloa. It's titled Youth in Khutsong, Nostalgia for a New Political Present. I think, I would just want to go into, obviously, the gist of it and get our guest to take us through everything. But before I do that, I just want to read you the bio of this individual, because now we met her through the hip-hop. A brother called NXZ. I don't know, most of you probably know him as a rapper as well. And yeah, so he used to host the session called Necks and Heads. And so we met her there at first, and she took pictures of us for free. She didn't even charge us, quality pictures. And she just disappeared after that, right? She just disappeared. And then suddenly I see her, and she's doing great things, like some of the things that she's doing that I'm going to read on the bio. And then I run into this paper as I'm Googling things, Wits University, this is Youth in Khutsong. What is this? Let me check it out. I go through the chapter and I'm like, what? This is needed. Let's have a conversation with this individual. So enough of me blabbering. Let me just read you the bio, right? Molemo Moiloa lives and works in Johannesburg and has worked in various capacities at the intersection of creative practice and community organizing. She currently works on notions of ungovernability, social infrastructure, or social infrastructures of cultural organizing and relationships to nature. She is one half of the artist collaborative MADEYOULOOK, who explores everyday popular imaginaries and their modalities for knowledge production. Molemo also co-leads the Open Restitution Africa project, an Africa-focused research platform for restitution of African heritage under the auspices of Andani.Africa. I hope I said that right. She also co-leads the Ungovernable, an experiment in communitary practice and ungovernability. MADEYOULOOK were DAAD Artists-in-Berlin Fellows for Visual Arts in 2022. Can I just repeat that one? I didn't hear myself. MADEYOULOOK were DAAD Artists-in-Berlin Fellows for Visual Arts 2022, and Lumbung, I don't know if it's Lumbung or Lumbung, artists at Documenta 15. They were nominees for the VLC Prize for Art and Politics 2016 to 2017 at the New School, New York. Molemo is a Chevening Clore Fellow from between 2016 and 2017, and a winner of a Vita Basadi Award for 2017. Molemo has a BA in Fine Arts and MA Social Anthropology degrees from Wits, both cum laude. So, welcome, Molemo Moiloa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for basically making time, because we know that it's that priceless commodity, and for you to actually take some of your time and come to Khutsong to come and talk about just a chapter of what you have written, and which we have not gone through because we thought the chapter was the whole thing, but then I guess before we go into the chapter itself, I believe it would be wise to let you give us a brief, description of what the whole paper was about and how we as Khutsong ended up in that, in that paper at the end of it.
Sure, I can do that. Hi, everybody. So firstly, I just want to sort of give a little dedication because to an incredible woman, Ms. Tabasina Khadebe, who I used to live with when I lived in Khutsong. And she passed away 2 months ago.
Oh.
So just want to put her name in the room with us.
Yes,
so yeah, I 10 years ago, can't believe it, a little bit more than 10 years ago, I was spending a lot of time here for primarily around my master's studies that I was doing at the time at Wits. And the entire thesis is about Khutsong, actually. Well, Merafong a little bit more broadly, but primarily about Khutsong. So that cum laude that I got from Khutsong. And it's looking at, it's entitled Sidla Abantwana Betu, and it's about being young in Khutsong, effectively.
Yeah. And
particularly about political imaginary in Khutsong. And the reason I came here is I had some friends here, including NXZ, who I called Khomotsob because I met him at university, not through hip-hop. And I had also been in Matric, actually, I'm giving away my age, the year that the demarcation protests broke out here.
Oh, yeah.
And I became quite obsessed with what I was seeing in the news from that time. So this would have been about 5 years or 4 or 5 years after that. So the demarcation protests had actually come to an end. Khutsong had been returned to Gauteng officially. And so I was coming in the aftermath of that, really. Mm-hmm. And meeting with young political actors involved in politics in various ways. Actually, the main way I entered in was through another community organizer who was a friend of mine, who then introduced me to community organizers here. And I spent 2 years back and forth in Khutsong. I was working at the time, so I wasn't able to stay here constantly, but I was here pretty much every weekend. Stayed sort of like, from Friday through the weekend. And I just kind of hung out, really, and met people, talked to people, and that's kind of what has emerged. And so it tries to kind of give a very broad picture of what it means to be young in Khutsong at the time. And one of the chapters was specifically more demarcation focused, actually, and that's the chapter that you've read. Yeah, but the rest of it is kind of also about ideas of like employment, being based in the minelands, kind of what it means to try and make life in this context in particular. And just to say that after I've been trying to kind of go back to it because it's been a while to try and refresh my memory and reread it. It's incredible how much has changed. But it also feels a little bit like Khutsong at that time was a kind of beacon that like the rest of the country has caught up to. It really feels like what was happening in Khutsong at that time, South Africa as a country has kind of only just woken up to in the last couple of years. It like feels like a prophecy almost. So that's interesting.
So you feel like Khutsong itself, as it was basically going through the protesting and everything, you feel like the history is sort of repeating itself?
Well, just around kind of like the things young people were saying and dealing with at that time. Now you just read in the newspapers all the time, actually. The kinds of challenges that we're facing as a country now, around service delivery, around the degree to which the state is delivering on its promises, the kind of, I think there's a general sense that like the dream, the Rainbow Nation dream is over. It's like there in the country. I feel like people in Khutsong were saying that 10 years ago.
They were way ahead of their time.
Way ahead of their time. Yeah, the rest of the country is catching up.
Yeah. All right. That's interesting. So as I was going through the paper, right, I think the first thing would be is the fact that before I got the paper, I had another guest. His name is Mahavata Taburamaine. He's an actor who's doing great things. He's actually from Khutsong. And we were talking about one of the productions he was involved in called Skahlelu OR, and in Skahlelu OR, it's actually a praise poem by Professor Walisi Rote. So in the whole conversation we had, I think maybe these things just connect. I don't know the universe, what God, the ancestors. I don't know, but for some reason, it led us to this, and one of the questions we were sort of like battling with was whether ancestors had memory, and so now, because we are talking about nostalgia, nostalgia is like obviously past times. But then you do like a wordplay sort of MC type of thing with it, where you are like nostalgia in nostalgia for a new political present. So it's like nostalgia, but then a new political present. Do you mind just basically taking us through just what all of that means, like just that wordplay, and nostalgia and the present.
Yeah. So nostalgia generally refers to the idea of like dreaming, reminiscing, missing the past.
Yeah.
And it's usually something you associate with old people, like, when your grandfather says, "Oh, in my time," that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in this chapter, and in speaking particularly to some of the people who are present in that chapter, what was really interesting was there seemed to be a nostalgia for like the apartheid struggle. So people seem to have like a positive memory about a time that we weren't actually alive, or like maybe some of us were just born, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So people talk about that fight, that struggle, in very positive ways. And right. And one of the things that was really interesting coming here in whenever that was 2010. Soon after the demarcation struggle, it was called The Struggle, right? And before that, we used to use the word The Struggle for the anti-apartheid struggle. And then that term was being used here in 2010 by people in their early 20s, And it's like,
the struggle.
What time am I in? Where am I? Kind of thing. And there was this kind of time zone jumping that was happening, where part of the reason I became so obsessed when I was in matric watching the news was that so much of how the demarcation struggle that was happening here looked like the 1980s. Like people might have been wearing, I don't know, Nikes or something, but like even the way people's bodies moved, like I remember watching this footage, and it was the YCL in the front, and it was coming down, the main road from sort of Coltonville side into Khutsong. And there was a huge protest. It was like many, many people behind them. And they were like toy-toying, and it was like people are, I don't want to say possessed, but like embodying, like a spirit of some other time. And it's something that happens in a lot of youth protest.
Yeah.
And for example, one of the things that's quite extraordinary reading this is pre-EFF.
Yeah.
And it's pre-Fees Must Fall, fallism time. With like the fallists and with EFF, now we see it a lot, that there's like, now it's become very normal to see young people occupying this kind of ghost of the past. But Khutsong was the first time that I had seen it. And so this idea of a nostalgia for a different political present is the idea that in some ways people are calling on the past because the past was promising us something. And there was this idea that struggle was supposed to result in something. And that something, at that time of the demarcation protests, it was clear that something hadn't arrived. So in a way, people are like pulling the past into the present to say, we're still fighting for the same thing. And young people who weren't alive then are kind of re-embodying a time of the past to say that period isn't finished and that it continues. But it's also a kind of, I think, a kind of political power, because that struggle has so much, like everybody agrees that struggle was important. So then when you put on the clothes of that struggle, then this struggle becomes important too, in a way.
To you, in the present.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
like, because the thing is, in the present, Khutsong in its state, it's very bad, right? Because just after that whole thing, we lost a lot of just places. In fact, like places of, I guess, social interaction, or places where we used to have gyms, for instance. We used to have a swimming pool, and those places are missing. Some libraries were burned. And that's what the present is currently. And we are still obviously struggling with all sorts of problems like unemployment. We are struggling with a poor education system, the likes that, like you said, the same stuff that you see on TV. And just taking it out of Khutsong a little bit and just maybe looking at the whole country. How does, obviously you said the whole thing is sort of like, in a way, connected to Khutsong in the country. But how does it look for you now in the country as a whole, relating it obviously to what you have written about Khutsong about 10 years ago?
So I think one of the things that's important to state is that at the time of the law that was put into place that changed the demarcations, there were 3 places that were moved. The border was moved. Khutsong was the only one to, can I swear on this podcast, to get really angry.
I'm not sure. We've never had anyone cast, but yeah.
Khutsong was the only one to resist. Resist is a better word.
Yeah.
And Khutsong is the only one to be returned. So all 3 were angry with the demarcation change, but Khutsong was the only one to resist, and Khutsong was the only one to be returned back into Gauteng. But it's also important to note that in Gauteng, and I meant to check before I came here, but I think it's still the same. In Gauteng, Western area is the poorest municipality.
Yeah.
And that includes in terms of how much money is given by the provincial government to that municipality to function. And Merafong was the second. These are statistics from when I wrote this, but I think it's pretty much the same. So even though Khutsong was returned to Gauteng, it was returned to a situation where, as much as Gauteng province is the economic center of the country, this part of the province has been abandoned for a long, long time. So it's like closer, but it's not in the family, no?
Maybe it's being punished for actually resisting and winning
that
against,
as well.
that whole thing.
I would say with the infrastructure issue, that's definitely the case, right?
Yeah.
So when I was here, they were rebuilding some of the schools, some of the classrooms that had burned. The library had been moved to the police station. I don't know if it's still there.
There is a library at the police station, but we also have modular libraries, those ones.
Okay, so they haven't rebuilt stuff, The swimming pool was gone. There was just which I described as a wall that said swimming pool, but the pool wasn't there.
Yeah, there was.
It was painted in blue.
Exactly.
And I think the lack of reconstructing that infrastructure is like a punishment. They're doing similar things in KZN now since the riots 2 years ago, whenever it was, no? Where now KZN is being punished. They're not rebuilding a lot of the stuff that was taken away. So I think in one sense, even though there was a victory, and I think that victory is an important victory and an interesting victory, it was a victory into a situation that was still a challenge.
Yeah.
I think that the situation that then follows, and particularly the fallist period and the coming of EFF, kind of points to how young people in Broad were really frustrated. So even though you see this really strong presence of young people in the demarcation protests in Khutsong, at that time there was this idea that the Born Frees were apolitical. They now when you think you don't really think of young people as being apolitical so much anymore. But at the time, the term born free also meant you don't care, you don't know what your parents died for. You don't know
what's going on with everything that has happened politically in the country.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's changed immensely since the demarcation protests. I think we now understand young people to be much more political, and that's because of this like growing resentment around being completely abandoned. So in that time, I think we had like 30% youth unemployment 10 years ago, and now I think it's closer to 60%. No. So, and this is partly why I'm saying Khutsong felt like a prophecy. It was like what was coming for the rest of the country.
It was basically the spark that started a whole fire.
Absolutely.
So, you talking about, Khutsong, like obviously, and you visiting it, coming in to experience with us what was happening at the time, because I was one of the people affected by that whole thing. In fact, a lot of, I'm also exposing my age here, but I was also one of the people that was affected because I was actually in matric at the time, and it affected us so bad that we had to go ride in Northwest because we couldn't ride this side because the community was just like, no ways. We're not going to let these people ride when the government is not taking us serious. And so as a result, the matric results dropped and stuff like that. Things happened, and we didn't do as well as we were supposed to do. Most of us had maybe the conditions been different, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. What I was going to right now was to just ask you. So you chose Khutsong as a case study for a reason. Was it because you knew people here, or was it because obviously, the story you just told that it's in fact the only municipality that was incorporated back into Gauteng? Why the other two? Why did you leave the other two that lost? Or you probably even touch on them in the paper, but why Khutsong in particular?
Yeah. So it's a slightly longer story. So I knew that I wanted to do something focused on young people. Initially, my interest was in thinking about youth of or children of anti-apartheid activists.
Oh yeah,
Was what initially was my pitch to my supervisor that's what I wanted to do my thesis on. And then actually I watched, and that was partly because now I'm exposing myself. I had an experience returning home I was living with my parents, returning home to their house one afternoon, and my cousin was staying with us at the time. He was watching something on the television, and it was my mother. And he had found a DVD somewhere, I don't know how he found it, but he had found a DVD somewhere in the shelf somewhere, and he was playing a DVD, and it was my mother on the screen, and it was actually from TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She was giving testimony, and the craziest thing is she looked exactly like my younger sister. There was something about the way she was speaking, and she was speaking about being tortured, and she looked like my sister. And I was like, how is it possible that my sister has these mannerisms of my mother when she's talking about being tortured by the apartheid police? There's something strange here. And it made me think about this question of the things we inherit from our parents. And the traumas that we inherit from our parents. And so that's what I was interested in doing initially. Then I actually went to go see a play by John Kani called Nothing But the Truth.
Yeah.
And I think I'd read it at school or something, but I actually saw him on stage. And in that play, it's actually also around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and he is an old man, and his daughter, who he has raised, who's actually his brother's child, is a interpreter at the TRC, and she's coming back, and she's giving information about what's happened in the day, and they start to have a bit of a fight, and it's because she's talking about all these heroes of the anti-apartheid struggle. And she obviously doesn't see him as a hero of the anti-apartheid struggle because he just kept a normal job. And what ends up happening by the end of the play is they have a big fight because her father, the reason her father didn't raise her is he left the country. He went into exile as a struggle hero. And he stayed behind to look after her, and And partly what it showed me was how in South Africa, we've created this narrative that they are like struggle heroes, usually ANC affiliated, or like, centered in the big cities as well. Places like Soweto become the center of the struggle history, when in fact, everybody was affected.
That's very true.
Everybody was traumatized. And the people who stayed behind to keep things together, to keep the families together, are as much heroes as the people who left to go fight in the MK or whatever. And thinking about it in this sense of like, they are all heroes, they were all traumatized, it means we are all traumatized too, because we are all the children of them, right? And that's when I became more interested in thinking about youth more broadly and trying to understand what are the traumas that we carry from the generations before us, and how is that affecting the way young people organize, the way young people try to make life, and particularly how we think about politics. And so when I wanted to do that and I wanted to think about young people in general, I was like, okay, but then where do I
begin?
Where do I go?
It's so huge, right? It's such a huge pond.
And then Khutsong felt like the right place to come.
The right place to come. Whoa, I don't know how long we've been recording, my king, because I want to give other people a chance to also ask questions. It shouldn't be just, be like my sort of like, questions only. So how long have we been recording so far? 30 minutes. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, I'll just go on this question. So there's in the paper, right? Or in fact, in the paper you tell 3 stories, I think, 2 stories of these guys who are activists, right? And they have names. I don't remember the names.
It's not their real name.
It's not real names. Thank God, because. These guys, they are going through a political sort of like thing, and they are at first a part of this party, and go through some sort of metamorphosis where they change and switch to another political party due to the advantages that come with being affiliated with, that particular party. Why did you feel like those stories were important to incorporate in the paper, and why did you feel like, well, in fact, you even, to an extent, you don't judge these guys, you're like, but honestly, truly speaking, right, this man had to in one of I found it funny, but he had to like sort of like build a gate for his mother, because back in the day, we never used to have fences, right? So this man had to build a gate. He had to find a job. He had to take care, basically, of the family. And so he switched. He became part of another political party. And in becoming a part of that political party, he actually advanced a little bit in life and became better. In fact, both of them, of the 3 of them. So why did you feel like it was important to use them as a way to understand what this nostalgia and the struggle and the politics, come together? Yeah.
So throughout the thesis, I mostly just tell stories. That chapter is actually the least storytelling-ish one. The part of the reason the thesis is so thick, and by the way, your thesis is not supposed to be this thick when you do a master's, so please don't be afraid. I wrote too much. Yeah. And part of the reason I wrote too much is that the way I write is like very, very descriptive. So my thesis was in anthropology, social anthropology. And in social anthropology, they have this concept called thick description, which I really love, and I use it in a lot of my work, which is to describe the minute details. So like if you read the first chapter, I like describe the market on the corner in Skopas that I used to spend most of my time, but I'm like describing even the details of what it's constructed out of and these kinds of things. And that's kind of my love letter to Merafong in a way. That's great. Because I think to describe these like tiny details is also to pay attention and to give energy to the kind of the thing that is sort of feeding you and you're learning from. And so in each chapter, there's different people who are like the central narrative of each chapter. And so sort of describing the way that they're thinking about their lives and where they want to go as young people. Oh, yeah. So that chapter is primarily about two guys who are from the YCL. And if you know your YCL politics of that time, you know who they are, but it's not their real name.
I think I know them.
I think you probably do.
I know them, yeah.
But it starts off with a very close friend of mine, Gabelo. Just said his name. He's got a different name in the chapter.
No, we can mute it if you want us to.
It's probably fine.
Yeah.
And he was from the PAC. The thing that was so interesting about that, I mean, for me, like the PAC is like from a long time ago in a way. And it was really interesting to hang out with these like PAC affiliated young people.
Yeah.
Because it's an ideological position. To be associated with the PAC, you're not trying to take over the country.
Yeah,
you're not even trying to get seats
their
in parliament.
manifesto is very straightforward.
You know?
It's very.
So you're making a very particular choice.
Yeah.
And like what the chapter tries to engage with is that actually most young people come to politics for I think the one guy describes it as our concerns start at home. They come to politics because they see problems and they feel like the political road is the way to solve those problems. And that's what you kind of pick up, particularly from people who are involved with the PAC, but actually across the board. But then what you see is that it's also a way to make life, because people need to be able to make life. And for young people, it is so hard. I mean, 60% unemployment is insane.
It's really insane.
And there's a whole chapter called Waiting, because we were just chilling on the corner every day because people just didn't have anywhere else to go, you know? So what it tries to track is the fact that people come to politics to make a difference, but people also need to be able to make life. So the example with the fence, these guys were very involved in the demarcation protests. The police see them in their yard and they start to beat them. And he describes when he's describing to me that they had been beaten in the yard by the cops, he says there wasn't a fence here then, which tells you that they can now build a fence, right? But part of the reason he can build the fence is he now works in the mayor's office, because a lot of those guys who were leading the demarcation protest ended up
definitely true
in like the political center.
Yes.
But it makes sense, right? Because you've committed your time, you've committed your energy. You want to dedicate yourself to something, it needs to be able to feed you back. That's just normal, right? We can't keep normal. Giving. We also have to get back.
It's the harsh reality of just being an activist, or just being someone who is really involved with community, someone who really wants to make a difference, and it becomes very tough, because then you change like those guys. You really literally just switch and become a totally different person, because of the struggle.
The struggle.
So I think I can open up, to the audience, to everyone who wants to ask Molemo anything. Before I continue to close, the whole thing, I think anyone who has a question can just straight up shoot. Anyone? Okay, sir.
I'd like to know, since you wrote the thesis, where did it go after that? Or do you write it, then you get your qualifications? What impact have you seen in the track since you wrote it? Because that time in 2010, I was not paying attention to politics. So I'd like to know what actually it did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did actually give some copies of the thesis to the library, the one that was in the police station. I have no idea if they ever ended up on a shelf.
I don't know. I've never seen them, but I don't know. Yeah.
So yeah, the way it works is you submit your thesis, you have to make corrections, whatever, and then you get your qualification. I donated some copies to the library, and then the chapter that you read is actually from this journal, which is It's actually the American Psychological Association, but they actually hosted some South Africans who wanted to have a conference and then a publication on nostalgia, and I contributed a paper to that. So that's why that one's maybe more accessible. So that's kind of what happened with the direct knowledge of the actual thesis. It didn't go much further than that. In terms of like thinking about youth politics though, a number of us who were kind of writing around youth politics, we kind of gathered together. Actually at that time, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, who later ended up in the EFF, he was part of our reading group. He was also doing work on youth politics. A couple of us developed like a conference of young people trying to think about youth politics together. And that's kind of grown the youth politics sort of thinking space a little bit. And I think has informed some of how other people have gone forward to sort of work. So from that perspective, that's kind of what happened. From a more personal perspective, I can say, I think that's the wedding coming.
Yes.
From a
We're about
personal
to catch a bouquet right now.
No, too sensitive because that's going to be loud. From a personal perspective, I can say that it completely changed my life, being here, and really shifted the way that I started to operate. So I was trained in fine art initially, and the fine art I was trained in was very apolitical and like separated from community. At the time that I was doing this, I got a job working a few days a week at the Market Photo Workshop, which is like a community-based photography school in Jozi, in town. And the combination of those two things, I think, really informed the fact that I was never going to be able to go back to being like an apolitical practitioner in some way. So since then, my work has really shifted towards thinking about community organizing, thinking about an artistic practice that's connected to society in some way. And I hadn't really made this connection, but now I realize it's definitely a connection. My most recent project that I started with some other people is called Ungovernable. And one of the things that emerged just as I was like finishing off the thesis is I found a text that I hadn't previously found, where someone had been writing about Khutsong in the late 80s. And that was really interesting because things had gone down here in the late 80s, which I hadn't realized. And then there's also some stuff from, I think, like the 60s as well. So actually, there's a long tradition of ungovernability here. And so I think I hadn't made the connection until you invited me, actually, that I think ungovernability has also become part of me a little bit. But ungovernable is it's a registered organization, but I like to think of it more as a project because organizations are a lot of work. What we do is we're really interested in ungovernability, not just as we often, when we think of ungovernability, we think of like burning tires and this kind of thing. And that's true. But one of the other sides of ungovernability is that we start to organize ourselves. So when we look at the period of the 1980s, when people were like rendering South Africa ungovernable, they were also developing street committees, block committees. And you saw this happening here, right? Is that people started to organize themselves. Because the state started to retreat, people had to organize their own systems and their own ways of working. And that's become something that I am very dedicated to, is not necessarily waiting for the government to do things for us, to fix things for us. So a lot of our work and a lot of my artistic work now is very focused on sort of land issues and thinking about what the land does for us and what it means for us. And so one of the things Ungovernable did until very recently, because we got kicked out, is farming, teaching like indigenous farming methods, thinking about medicine, growing food, this kind of thing. We're going to get back in.
Yeah, because the thing is, you know, speaking of, I think I should just push it
yes,
in.
thanks.
We have been given these booklets for free. Everyone is going to get a copy, I believe. I think there's enough for everyone. So these copies are actually speaking to what she's saying about land and her work in that department recently. So do you want to go a little bit into it and tell us about, what it all means? And yeah, we are obviously going to read it when we get home, in our spare time. But do you want to probably maybe just a little bit go
Quick
into
introduction. So for you literary people, there's very few words in that one. Because I'm from the visual arts, both these publications are by MADEYOULOOK, which is the arts collaborative that I'm part of. It's myself and Molemo Moiloa. And together we make artworks. And at the moment we're trying to make a film about returning to the land, belonging in the land. It's somewhat informed by sort of pre-colonial South African history of the land. The film is taking a while because we make a little piece and then we find some more money and then we make a little piece and then we find some more money. But this book is it's before the film, and it's trying to think about how do we depict the land when so much of the history of depicting the land is actually colonial and racist. And so what are our alternatives, and also how do we think about making images of the land when the indigenous mode of talking about the landscape is not in images necessarily, it's in oral history. So how do you learn from oral history to make images? So it's mostly pictures, but there's some words. And then, and it's really thinking about the question of, it's not a question of when will the land return, it's a question of when the land returns, what will we do with it? And what will it mean to us? So that's what that's about. And then there's another publication which is many more words. It's a little bit academic, but it's a group of artists writing about other artists' work. So that one for the more literary types.
Oh, that's great. Because land is very important, right? I don't know. I just want to add a question on the land issue, because the thing is, how the land was taken is that people came in and then they basically drew lines or built fences and said, no, this is my piece of land. Had a piece of paper, write it down, say, no, this is whose land and everything like that. And then the Bantustans come up out of, that whole apartheid issue. And we are, I guess, I don't want to say we are, because then I sound like a victim. But then our people get given these small pieces of land. And I don't know what's your take on that? Like, how does it look from your side as an academic looking at it? How are you guys analyzing the land issue as far as how it was taken and how it will be returned? Because now to return it or to basically share it with everyone has a lot of paperwork involved. Whereas in the past, it was not like that. You just had to be,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't really approach land issues from an academic perspective so much. Like, I don't know as much about it. I sometimes lecture at the university, but I don't really do academic work that much anymore. So I approach the land issue more from as a land worker. Oh, yeah. And I work with other land workers. And for me, the thing that I think is really important, which is the notion of ungovernability is related to, is to move away from large scale responses and to do very practical small scale responses. Because one of the things about being removed from the land since at least 1913 is that we don't even know how to work the land anymore, many of us. We right?
just
we know we want the land, but
what are we going to do with it once we have it?
Can I grow a tomato, and so these small scale approaches to reconnecting with the land and working from existing knowledge bases and trying to relearn those methods is really what I'm most interested in. So we're not necessarily looking at these big farms, because anyway, those really big farms are not very viable, right? They've depleted the soils. So if that guy is giving you that land back, it's partly because he can't make it grow anything anymore without pummeling it with chemicals, Whereas the indigenous modes that our great grandmothers used to use were about replenishing the soil to grow more food. So can we go back to those kinds of methodologies,
That's really interesting.
So relearning that, getting good at working with the land, and then doing it small. And if all of us can do a little bit, then collectively it becomes bigger. It becomes
something huge.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Anybody else with a question?
So I can say that the way we approach it so Made You Look, it's not actually a Nas reference. The notion of Made You Look is re-looking at things that we otherwise don't look at enough. And what we generally do is we try to look at everyday ordinary life and try to then like pull that ordinariness out and unpack it in a lot more detail. So what I was saying about thick description is like just like really looking at things in their close detail. So a lot of our projects are focused on trying to take things that we just take for granted and re-look them to understand the knowledge that they offer us. So for example, our very first project was called Sermon on a Train. And it was, it took the mode of the like train church, but instead of like the muriti on the train, we got university lecturers to try and give lectures on the train, right? So you're taking something that's an everyday thing of pastor on the train preaching. We don't even think about it anymore. Maybe you just avoid that car on the train, and trying to like twist it in some way. One of the first projects we did on land actually was not on big farms that we're like far away from, but thinking about the yard. The project's called Ejardini, and it tries to think about what is the relationship we do have to the land, considering we've been so separate. And it's probably your mother or grandmother's backyard, and thinking about that little garden and what it offers, right? Because a lot of the kind of gardening that we use is actually very colonial, but we've been able to take that colonial mode and change it into something that belongs to us. And that can be a way of thinking about other colonial things that we've inherited and how we change them. So the way that we approach it is that you can take memory, you can take history, you can go into the archives, and if you look at things that you don't usually look at, and as an artist really like get people to realize we have a lot more than we think we do. And that... That is a very difficult question. Advice for the children.
Talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I think... Go to school? No. I mean, I think one of the things that is probably really valuable is like more intergenerational conversation. And so that's maybe not advice to children, that's advice to us and advice to our parents and our grandparents to ensure that those conversations happen. I think one of the biggest problems we're actually facing is these generational separations. Like our president is 70, I think.
Yeah.
And then you've got this 60% unemployment of young people. Like there's this very big separation. And like we don't even know what these youngsters are going to be facing, with like digital AI, all of this stuff, right? They're going to be dealing with a whole lot of stuff we're not even prepared for. But those knowledges that other generations have, I think we haven't got them enough. We were talking about Isthakazelo earlier, and like not being able to pass these things down. So that's maybe not advice for the little ones. It's advice for us to ensure that that gap doesn't keep separating.
Doesn't keep building up and everything like that.
Just to see this 10 years later.
Then my advice would be maybe more than 10 years, maybe like 15 years, is I really think that we're the only ones we have. The 70-year-old president or whatever is not the one we can rely on. We only have ourselves and each other, and we need to find ways to ensure that we give ourselves and each other what we need.
There's another question coming from the gentleman there at the back.
I mean, obviously, there's not nearly enough happening. And we definitely, and that's partly what this article even engages with, is that things have really shifted to what's called like a neoliberal era, which is where capital and companies run this country. And it's actually, sorry, now I'm going to start preaching. It's getting worse. Like the stuff around Eskom now, they just want to privatize electricity, right? And if they privatize electricity, it's going to get more expensive. And I think what we're facing as a country is going to be more and more and more of companies just taking over. Like, we know at the moment there's a serious problem with the government's capacity to run things, which is why Eskom's falling apart, whatever. But because we're desperate, now we're all saying, oh, companies, please save us, right? So now there's like a committee of government and big business working together to try and solve the country's problems. But big business is not invested in people, it's invested in profits, you know? So I think we need to already be clocking that this is going to get worse, it's not going to get better. And companies are not, they're never going to give more than they have to, and they're never going to give it in ways that really make a difference. And for me, the thing that we need to get good at is how we negotiate that money. So, I mean, those companies are forced to give 1% of their profits for corporate social responsibility, but often what they'll do is they'll give it to a middleman company, and then that middleman company will run programs. That's fine. There needs to be somebody who coordinates, but then somebody who coordinates should be us. And often when we're working in like non-profit community-based ways, we're asking for just a little bit at the end. We're not trying to get into that middleman sort of level. And I think we need more skills and capacity to start like coming into that phase and into that sort of place and demanding what we deserve from those people. But to do that, we need to be good at like bookkeeping. We need to be good at running these NPOs. We need to be good at negotiating, getting into the boardrooms, etc. And it's those skills that we really need to build, which is quite a challenge, but I think it's possible.
And that's why I normally say like people need to obviously build their skill set more than focusing on the vote. I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. You should vote, but then I normally tell people to say you can still vote, but if you are not competent, when the post comes out from the municipality or wherever, and they're looking for people to, you know, close certain gaps in their, I guess, service delivery, whatever, you will not get that job because you are not qualified to do that job, not because you didn't vote or you voted, you know. So it's important that people really take that serious and take that into consideration and upskill and not only focus on just solving this with a vote. Who has a question? Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You have a question, Kim?
Yeah. I mean, I would completely agree with that. I think universities it's partly why I haven't gone into universities. I think they're not the place for people to get the skills that they need. Unfortunately, the way the system works, people need qualifications to get things often. But like for me, if you're going to go get the qualification, it's just to get the qualification. It's not to get skills, to be honest. So when I told my mother that I wanted to become an artist and I wanted to study art, she said, fine, but then you've got to work. So I had to work throughout my studies. And I mostly did like volunteer work. I did have one job that was like 40 Rand a day, I think, something like that. But most of it was like volunteer work. And she was like, as long as you start working right from the beginning, then you'll grow the skills so that I'm not going to, she was terrified of me like finishing school with an art degree and like no opportunities, right? And it was huge. It made such a difference. And I really think these kinds of projects, the skills that you get from running these kinds of events or necks and heads and these kinds of things, where you get really good at organizing, you start to understand equipment, you understand communication, you know, you start to just like understand coordination, project management, those kinds of things. They may not be like major career type things, but actually they really help you so that when you are in a job interview, you already have the confidence that you know how to do these things and you can articulate yourself as like, this is what I do in my community. These are the kinds of things that I've been doing for years off my own steam. So I think if we can do more of that kind of thing, we become much more skilled than going to university actually. And like literally these kinds of spaces totally do that.
Great. We also have a question from Mr. Morena Maboe. Kingman.
Cool.
It's packed. It's a little bit packed. But yeah.
So as regards politics, I mean, I think politics are inevitable. It's like a very natural human thing. So at some level, we can't avoid it. I think the thing that is really necessary, that politics is supposed to be, but sometimes I wonder if we still have it, is ideology. I do think it's really important to have a political position. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at some of our leadership, like, I shouldn't say names, but like TV the other day, right? What is that guy's opinion? Like, what does he believe in? No clue, right? I don't think he knows, right? Yes, he's a pragmatist. He's someone who like moves according to, no? And that's why he's there when he's done nothing, right? And so it becomes much more about like career moving than like a position. By comparison, to be honest, and I'm not like supportive of these people at all, the DA has a stronger ideology. Like, you know where they stand. They're on the side of business. They want to privatize everything. They want to put capable people, read white people in certain positions, etc., right? They have a position. You can say their position. Whereas the people who are supposedly on our side, like, maybe you think they're on your side, but then sometimes their position looks a bit like the DA, or like, you know, it's not that clear. I think that an ideological position is really important. I think you need to know what like drives you. I think that is important. And particularly like, as we recognize that we need positions that are much more holistic, that integrate many more parts of our lives. And I think as artists, that's also much easier to see than many other people. Like, people like to separate out agriculture, art, business, no, like see those things as separate things when actually they should be related. So I think that's really important, and that's like a political thing. But then I think I would probably agree with you that I don't think that's where our solutions lie. I think our solutions lie at like a much more localized level, personally. The question about the land things, let's talk. One of the things we're trying to do is actually get more land working people to kind of talk to each other and like work together a bit. To be honest, we're not working commercially. We're working at like a much more educational kind of communitary level. So I have like no advice on commercial farming, but we do work with some people who do work commercially. But I think that the thing that is so incredible about bringing people into working the land is how completely differently you relate to the land, to food, when you grow it yourself. And the kinds of possibilities that emerge when, for example, when we have our working sessions, or when we did before we were kicked off the land, we had also like really multi-generational, like young ones helping and then older people kind of hanging around. I think working the land has a lot of potential for really bringing people together in a different kind of way. So I think we should all be doing it as much as possible. Yeah.
Going once, going twice. Okay, no more questions. All right. I think, Molemo, we have sort of like munched a lot on a lot with regards to your paper, and I think most of us have taken something from it, and from here on, it will be a matter of what do we do with that, you know? But before we leave, obviously, you have also another piece of work that you worked on called Tactics of Disquiet, right? No, in fact, it's like MADEYOULOOK. It's MADEYOULOOK, which is one of the organizations that you work with, or that you form a part of. Could you please tell us a little bit about this piece of work that you have given us? I think everyone is also going to leave with a copy of this to read, and then maybe you can write a review, because I believe that like small discussions like this shouldn't just be limited to just, okay, we are talking on video and then it ends there. I think you can read the paper, write something about it, talk about it, and then that's how we create sort of like a conversation outside of spaces like these, you know, on the internet or whatever. And the algorithm will help us, you know, multiply the information and whatnot if we do that, if everyone gets involved. So this MADEYOULOOK booklet, what is it all about? Can you just please tell? It's called Tactics of Disquiet.
Yes, Tactics of Disquiet. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So this might be difficult for you to believe as literary people, but artists very rarely write. visual artists. Very rarely write. And there was another little booklet that I wanted to bring, but I couldn't find the copies, which is of photographer Santu Mofokeng, who's probably the best photographer from South Africa ever. He passed away a few years ago, and he was a major writer, and he's really influenced us to think about writing about our own work. And so this is a first version. We want to make more of artists writing about other artists, and it's partly also, I suppose, exactly what you're saying about creating knowledge about each other's work as well, and not just relying on like an academic to come
exactly
for their master's thesis to write about you, but rather to write about yourselves. So it's a collection of writing by artists about other artists. Some of it's maybe like a little bit more academic and wordy. Like our articles really, when I read it, I was like, goodness, the words in here are too big.
They're very heavy with the pen.
Yeah, it wasn't
all
too
right.
good. Yeah.
Okay. No, we'll definitely go into it and probably do a review. I usually do short reviews on YouTube, you know, where you will also find this recording. And so I think other people are much more into writing. Some are into just maybe posting on Facebook or Twitter, you know. But everyone can just write something about everything that you do. Like this session is something that you can write about, your thoughts on it. It doesn't matter if we believe them or if we agree with you or not, just write them down. Those are your thoughts. I think that's how we will create a way. Even if I disagree with you, I'll tell you why I disagree with you. I'm not fighting with you, I'm fighting with what you are saying. So don't take it personal, you know, because I know people are like, no, you know, he hates me, this one. Always bringing negative comments into my post. Stay away, negative energy. We are dealing with a lot of stuff, you know. But with that said, Molemo, I just want to obviously end this on a note. I think you have covered most of it, and I don't have any questions to ask you further. So I think we should end it here. And I don't know, do you have any last words for Khutsong that you want to leave, you know? In fact, for the entire Merafon, because now the people in Kokosi and the people in Wedela are feeling like, oh, you know, you know. So do you have anything to say to the community of Khutsong? Because I believe what you believe. I believe I have Morena, I have Khosi, I have Vibe. These are all the people I have. The people that are here. Everybody else that's not here, then I don't like. What am I gonna do with those people? So we have each other. That's literally who we have, and so that's basically my answer. But to you, what would the answer be? Would it, if you were to leave us with a last word?
I watched one of your podcasts actually.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember which one it was because I watched a few, and in one of them you were complaining a lot about Khutsong, and you were like very frustrated. And I think what I would want to say is that actually there's an incredible creative energy here, and there has always been. There's like multiple generations of incredible creative energy here, and the best thing to do is to work with what we have and to work with the things that we have at our disposal, I think, and then to grow those. So that's what I would say is I think the frustration is well placed, but there's a lot that can be built and places to go for sure.
Last question that we ask every guest that comes to the eRead project is describe a book in 3 words. Like, so if Molemo was to describe a book in 3 words, what would those words be?
Just a book in general.
Yeah, just any book in general.
Haunting.
Haunting.
All
right.
Inspiring.
Inspiring.
Traversing.
Traversing. So it's haunting, inspiring, and traversing. Qu'est-ce qu'on voit pas? Ça me va la dictionnaire. So on the real though, it's really humbling to have, people who are actually doing important work like this come to our locations and talk about it. Because I think as Khutsong, we underestimate what's coming for us. We underestimate like the lack of, I guess, of accountability that we are, that we have as a community, that we are not really being really aware of what's really going to go down in a couple of years. We were with Paul Zisiwe here, a very great writer as well, and a photographer and videographer. And he actually literally used the words ghost town. You know what I mean? So it really scared me. It haunts me. Like you said, like one of the words is haunts me. And I just want to speak to everyone to say, the little bit that you can do, whether it's a podcast, whether it's just shed that light and then stay focused, and then enhance your skills, and then really just put yourself in positions where you will be able to at least thrive, because it's really not easy right now. We are sitting with a 60% unemployment rate, and you don't want to be part of that statistic as far as just food and the basics are concerned. So the reason why I have Moiloa here is not necessarily because I West Coast is whole over traversing, dog. It's really real. It's like, okay, let's shed some light, Khutsong, and then see what can happen. And so she took the time from all the way from Johannesburg to come here and then have this talk with us, and we appreciate that, from the bottom of our hearts. We hope to have you here, back here one day again, hopefully as you grow in your field and everything, to share more knowledge, to share, I guess, more ideas, and going forward find ways to build at least something sustainable, and not just leave it to a podcast conversation, but have something solid built. So with that, I hope Refedit, peace and love,
Thank
peace
you.
and love, peace and love. That was a wrap. It's a wrap.